Well, whether it's a smooth animal or a shaggy animal, maybe a smooth man or a shaggy man, a car that's outside or a little plant that you want to put outside, maybe it's a model with some wispy hair or even just a chair. You see what I did there? If you can remove the background of an object in Photoshop, you're well on your way to being able to do just about anything with the application. And today, that's exactly what we're going to cover. I'm going to walk you through from start to finish, soup to nuts, all the little things that you can do, some of the artificial intelligence goodness that Photoshop has as well. And we are going to break down how you can isolate objects, remove backgrounds, and be well on your way to being able to do almost anything you want to do with Photoshop. So let's get started. All right, let's settle in here. We've got two different images which we want to extract today. This model and then also a full-length shot of this model here. Let's begin here with this because why make things complicated when maybe it's just going to be really easy? Let's duplicate our background here by just hitting Command or Control J. And Photoshop has this artificial intelligence button, Remove Background. It's a quick action. What happens if we hit it? Let's check it out. Remove background. Maybe this will solve all of our woes, and we've removed a background really easily. Well, if I shut off my background now, look at that. For a one-click solution, not too shabby. Let's go ahead and throw a solid color adjustment layer, or solid color fill layer, I should say, underneath this. Maybe we'll go kind of something in the middle so we can see the problems that this has left behind. A lot of Photoshop's artificial intelligence stuff, in this, the year of our Lord 2022, it's not quite perfect, but it's often really good. It misses the mark sometimes, but in this case, you can see it's done quite a remarkable job for just a one-click solution. So don't sleep on the remove background feature. How would we clean up this mask? Well, it's really about the hair. The edges around her jacket are all pretty good. You could do something like select the mask and reduce the density of the mask. Always a good idea to do with something like this. And just make sure that like a finger hasn't been cut off that you missed. It really lets you just see the background again. I can just make sure there's not like a big button sticking off of your jacket shoulder or something that the mask just clipped off. But that's not the case. The mask did a pretty solid job. The hair's a little bit of a mess here. In fact, if I reduce the density again, we'll probably be able to see some of her hair's missing. And not really though. It's not too bad there. It really did a pretty clean job around the top. A couple things we can do to begin cleaning this up. We're going to go over this pretty quickly because I want to spend a bit more time on the other technique, a kind of a more manual technique. Just ignore this, whatever this is. That's some kind of view glitch here in Photoshop. Yay. We're gonna first select our mask. And one of the things you can do is apply a levels adjustment directly to your mask. So make sure you select the mask and go Image Adjustments, Levels. And here with levels open, well, in order to get rid of some of this dark haloing action, we want to contract our mask. So that means filling in the areas that are black, make them even more black. What does that mean? Let me try to explain. I'm going to close out of levels. Let's hold down our Alt or Option key and click directly on our mask. This is going to give us allow us to view the alpha channel. Well, here along the edge, we can see that there's like this light gray spray that's coming off of her hair. And that light gray haloing glow, that's what is giving us this kind of grayish halo now, which obviously doesn't look good over this lighter background. And this is exactly what we can kind of just temper a little bit with the levels adjustment. So again, select that layer mask, go adjustments, levels, and all we're going to do is open up the blacks. And what I mean by that is we're just stretching out the blacks. We're increasing the level of blacks in our mask without overpowering anything. And we're going to do that by dragging the midpoint here away from the black slider, right? We're extending how far out the black reaches, right? And you can see if I really pull this far, I mean, now it's definitely all gone, but we've done a lot of damage to the hair and it doesn't look good. So we don't want to go that far. This is just a take it easy kind of adjustment here, right? We don't want to go too far, but we want it to do a little something. All right, so that's cool. Up here, we definitely have a problem where it just looks like the hair disappears. The next thing that I would do to help clean this up is grab my brush tool. I would set it to the blend mode of soft light, and then an opacity of, I mean, literally anywhere from 20 to 70% is going to work pretty well for this. I'm going to paint with my foreground color set to black because I want to remove some of this dark haloing. I'm going to make my brush bigger, as you just saw there. If you right click, you can increase the size. And then you just click around the edges of the hair. Now, again, we don't want to go too extreme here. I'm going to try to fade away that area where it just looks like the hair is disappearing. But what the soft light is doing is it's saying, okay, we're painting with black. Only really paint on the mask where the mask also is black or very dark gray. So it's not going to just act like a regular black brush and paint away all of her hair and all of these wispy hairs that are hanging out here, but it is going to help clean away some of that darker stuff. And again, with anything, you want to be careful how far you take it because you can end up doing a lot of damage and just straight up make the edges of the hair look really bad. In fact, we can set our foreground color to white and try to paint back in some of the edges of the hair, right? Beginning in the hair area and just allowing it to sort of flow out over the mask a little bit. I'm going to set my foreground color back to black right there. You can just use those arrows or the letter X to flip it back and forth. And I want to try to get rid of this little halo action that's going on up here around the top of her hair as well. I think that might end up being a problem later, but we'll see. Again, I don't want to go too extreme on it. And then down in here, we can paint away some of that background color that's coming through right here, kind of where her hair hangs down a little bit. All right, so that's pretty good. The final thing you can do is add a screen layer if this would be going over a really light background, or a multiply layer if it was going over a really dark background. It's easier to see how it works than really to explain it. So now that we've done our initial screening of the mask, we would just hit Command or Control J to duplicate our layer. Let's shut off the top real quick. We're going to just focus on the bottom. In fact, we can name this layer Screen here because we know we want to lighten the edges because we have that darker haloing around the edges. But it also depends on the color of background. So just if you know how it works, you'll know kind of when to use it. So I'm going to go with Screen here, and then I'm going to turn on my top layer. And I don't want to adjust this mask on top. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Command or Control G. It's going to grab that layer. In fact, we'll name this layer Model or Model Primary, whatever. But it's going to throw it inside of this group, right? So I'll name that group Model. But now we can apply a fresh layer mask just to that group, and we don't end up damaging our initial layer mask on our layer. All right, so now that I have that, I'll just come in here with my brush. I'm going to set my brush back. Well, let me just zoom in. I'm going to set my brush back to just the normal blend mode. Opacity, 40 is probably fine. You could adjust the flow as well. I tend to like to work with opacity when I'm retouching. I feel like it gives me better control. And what we want to do is begin painting away our top model. So when we paint in this layer mask, it's going to hide the woman in this layer, and this is her normal. So if we shut this off, you can see what it's going to reveal is just these really light edges. So we're going to paint away here some of this darker stuff. And what that's going to do is just help convert some of that hair that looks really dark to something that's nice and light. Now, where this is going to be detrimental to us is here around this top edge where we have kind of that halo-y edge. We can spend more time cleaning up the edge, sure. We could try fading it a little bit. That never hurts. But one of the things that's also, that can be very helpful for you to do, that's way too much down there, is really be on top of your opacity here as you're working. If the effect is too strong, just reduce that opacity. But also, you want to check out the rest of your edges because sometimes using a screen, or if you're trying to make the edges darker, a multiply layer underneath, you end up adding this dark or light halo. So you could come down to your screen layer and just with your foreground color set to black, crank that opacity up and just do a quick once over these edges just to pull back any potential brightness that could be leaking out underneath and making things look bad. You can do the same thing up here around the hair. You see how I'm just kind of knocking down that light halo-ness where I don't think where it really shouldn't be. All right, so that's probably it for this particular model. You can see it only took a couple minutes, and that was with me explaining it to you. And here we can change the color now. We can go to a really light color. It looks pretty good, and we can go to a really dark color, and it still looks pretty good. And that's just over a regular solid color. If you're moving her to a new image, there's going to be a lot more colors and textures and brightness and contrast and all sorts of different things that are really going to help blend in all of these edges and the hair and everything else. I kind of messed up there on the shoulder where I painted away too much of that, but We'll save that for another day. Let me just go in here. I'm just going to make this darker because I like I like a darker background. So there we have it. That is how I would use just the simple remove background artificial intelligence button. So if that does it for you and you enjoy that and that works for your image, great. That's a super easy way to do it. But if you want to know a little bit more of the nuts and bolts, let's take a look at doing it a little bit more manually, but still pretty quickly with this image right here. So I'll do the same thing just because I like to duplicate my layers and work on a new layer. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to name this layer model. And the first thing we'll do is we want to get a selection of her. So generally, in order to get a selection of your subject, you would use something like the quick selection tool. This works great, particularly if you have more than one subject. Maybe there's a she standing there and her husband is standing next to her, or there's another woman in the photo, or a whole group of people, and you only want to extract one person, get rid of everyone else that's in the photo. The quick selection tool is really great for that. The object selection tool also really good for that. You can use the lasso mode where you just draw a rough selection around somebody and get them, or the rectangle tool and you can select them like that. I don't want to do any of that. I want to just use select subject here. It's again another sort of artificial intelligence feature in Photoshop. It should be able to pick her out over this background relatively accurately. You can see here, sure enough, it's done a pretty good job. It even got rid of this whole area underneath her arm, except for one little area there next to her hand. We'll have to clean that up. We're missing her arm. We're going to be missing her hand. We'll fix all that. And then over here, we got some selections in this window well, and then it couldn't quite differentiate from the edge of her hair from the window. No big deal. We can fix all this stuff. So let's begin fixing it. All right, I'm going to grab the lasso tool and using a tablet, it really helps if you have a tablet here. If not, you can still do it with the mouse. I've done a ton of retouching with the mouse. It's not like you're completely up the creek without a paddle. I'm going to use my tablet though, and I'm going to hold down my Alt or Option key so it subtracts a selection. I'm going to get rid of that little bit, and then I'm just going to trace along her shoulder. Just kind of like that, just to kind of rebuild the shoulder. You can see the front side of her cheek is kind of missing. We'll go ahead, we'll add that back in the next step. I'll show you how that works. But let's try to sort of rebuild the top part of her hair. Again, we're just going to use the lasso tool for this. So we're just going to draw along the edge of her hair. And if you're not good with the freeform lasso tool, hey, totally understandable. I stink with it as well. Just use the polygonal lasso tool. I'm going to hold down Shift to add to this selection and just do a bunch of little clicks. Right? It's just little clicks right along here like that. And then close that off and then hold down Alt or Option to remove from that selection. And we're just cleaning up there around her head, okay? Doesn't have to be perfect. We're going to spend a little bit of additional time on her hair later. But let's just check out the rest of the image. It looks pretty good. Let's begin the process of refining this selection, and we're going to do that using the Select and Mask dialog. Select the Mask button will appear up here with a lot of your selection tools. If you don't see it there, you can just go Select and choose Select and Mask. So here in Select and Mask, there's a couple things that I want to change kind of right away. Remember, we're working up on a new layer. So here under View, I'm going to change this to View it on Black. That's going to allow me, if I crank my opacity up to 100%, it just extracts our basic rough selection of her over a black background. That allows me to zoom in here and really take a look at these edges around her hand. There's a lot of gunk that we need to clean up. And let's just start doing that right away. I'm going to go back to my old friend, the polygonal lasso tool first, and we are going to subtract from the selection. So you can just hit the center icon and then just click and manually select the areas that you want to get rid of, right? We don't like that. We want to get rid of this bit by her hand. That's just like a little weird hook thing here on the back of her hand as well. And then here along the edge of the dress, I just want to clean up this edge a little bit. And again, with things like the edge of a dress that are flowy, it can be very forgiving because if a little bit is shaved off of it, more than likely it's going to be impossible ever to notice that in the final image. That's not to say you shouldn't be careful and do a good job, of course, but just know what you can get away with. You couldn't shave off the side of a bride or groom's face and expect that nobody's going to notice that. There, we're going to fix the arm. And you can see, by the way, how pixelated and rough and just bad this polygonal lasso tool makes things look. We're going to fix all that stuff. Don't you worry about that. We're going to clean that up there. That's pretty good here. I'm going to add to the selection. So I'm going to grab this icon up here. I believe part of her thumb is missing here. Let's just clean that up around her thumb. there, something like that. Again, it looks really rough and jagged. Don't even worry about it. We're going to totally ignore everything from her neck up. Well, except maybe the side of her face. Although, we'll do that separately. But her hair, we're going to come back and do that later. I'm going to cut this little spike out of her shoulder. Let me set this back to subtract from the selection. Something like so. That's good. All of this looks pretty good. Oh, and remember, we're missing her arm and her hand. And by the way, if you reduce the opacity of your view on black, you can see the layer underneath. And the layer underneath is our original layer because we duplicated this layer, remember? You can see there is her arm back there. So let's grab our lasso tool. We want to add to the selection. So we're going to say, yeah, I would prefer her arm remain in the picture. Great. And the same here with her hand. And again, this selection does not have to be perfect. It just, make sure you're grabbing the bulk of the pixels. We're going to do smoothing and refining and cleaning up of this in just a second here. Great. We got her hand. And you can just manually go over the edges. And you can see here part of the dress got cut out there. And I think that's probably good enough. Maybe some of those edges at the bottom need to be cleaned up, but we don't need to do an absolute pixel perfect job for the sake of this tutorial. But you can see we've done a lot here. We've really cleaned up the big issues on the edge. And I would be remiss if I didn't just quickly add, there is a brush tool in here that you can use to add or subtract from selections. I use it occasionally. I'm mainly more of a lasso kind of guy. And then there is a quick selection tool in here as well. I almost never use it. I just find that it doesn't work that well. I don't know. Maybe it's just me and I'm not doing something correctly. It's not something I use all that often. Occasionally I will, but it's rare. I'm more of a lasso guy and a brush guy, and then you'll see we'll use the refine edge tool a little bit later. All right, let's clean up the edges of the dress and her skin and everything like that. You can see there's a little bit of haloing, right? This just glow around the edge. How do we get rid of that stuff? And how do we get rid of this really jaggy, pixely edge? Well, the first thing we're going to do is focus on the global refinements over here. And that would be first smooth. Let's just try cranking this up to like 20, and let's see what that does. Pretty good. It kind of makes her thumb stubby there on the end, but it smooths out all of that stuff we did with the lasso tool. That's great. Again, we ignore the hair and everything up there, but all around the edges of the dress, that's pretty good. Maybe we could feather this a little under a pixel, and then with that feather would come a contrast, which is just going to kind of sharpen up and tighten up that edge a little bit. And then I'll probably shift the edge inward a little bit. So that's just going to pull that selection in. And I don't know if you noticed, if you watch here where there's all this haloing, if I pull that edge in a little bit more, you'll see a little bit more of that haloing will disappear. Now we're going to have to adjust and work with some of that manually later, as we will bringing back a piece of her thumb, stuff like that. We'll have to clean that up manually. But for the most part, pretty good. We'll come back and fix the side of her face in just a second. All right, so now that we've done that, we want to output a layer mask. So let's come down here to the bottom to our output settings, and we don't want to output to a selection. We're going to go straight to a layer mask, and I'm going to hit OK. Great. We have her up on her own layer. The background is gone. The background only looks like it's not gone because we have our background still there. So let's go ahead and add a solid color layer here. And yeah, we'll just sample the blue of her dress and maybe make it really dark blue, just kind of like we did with our other image. Just contrasts nicely with her skin tone and allows us to really pick up anything around the edges. So let's do the same kind of thing where we clean up the edges of our mask. Now, I'm not focusing on the hair right now, so I'm not gonna go and apply a levels adjustment to the layer mask. I'm just gonna use my brush, and I'm going to set it to soft light. And there we go. And then reduce that opacity down to probably 20-30%, something like that. And then reduce the size as well. Knock that down quite a bit. Maybe knock it down into the 20s, 30s, maybe even a little bit less. All depends on the size of your image. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to try painting away some of this haloing, right? Just paint with black. And just watch, make sure you're not painting away big chunks of her skin. Maybe 20% is a little light. I'm going to push it up to like 70% and see what that looks like. Yep, 70% looks like it's really coming in here and getting the job done for me. That's great. And anywhere where the haloing really persists, like right there, that one little light spot, just jump out of soft light mode. Go back to the normal. Make your brush really small. Just get in there and just dab away any troublesome areas like that are really just kind of sticking out, right? Like that edge of her arm, right where it meets up with the fabric. It's just a little noticeable patch. We want to get rid of that. All right, so you can go around on your image and do that. And you can also, by the way, with the mask selected, use that density trick that I mentioned earlier. Bring the density up. This is going to really help with her thumb here, because we can come in and say, hey, set my foreground color to white. And I'm going to really just make sure we bring her thumb and the entire thumbnail that she has back into our cutout image. There we go. Now she has her entire thumb with fingernail. That's good. All right. We've gotten most of her body cut out. How do we fix her face or the edge of her face? Because she doesn't have a lot of skin real estate on that far side of her mouth. So anything that we cut off is really going to be quite noticeable. You might not know that it's gone, but you'll just be able to tell that her face is not right. And if we reduce the density here of our mask, we can see, in fact, that there's this whole dark strip here that's just been sheared right off. So we want to go into select a mask, fix that first, and then jump in and fix her hair. So you can select your layer mask and just simply hit the select and mask button here in the properties panel. It's going to bump us back into our select and mask dialog. All of our global refinements have been reset. So any changes we make, we're not all of a sudden going to be adjusting all of those edges that we've already finished and fixed. So let's go ahead and clean up the side of her face first. And we can come up here to view, and we can say onion skin in this case, just because we have that solid color layer covering up our original layer underneath, and we want to see the part of her cheek that we need to bring back. Let's reduce the transparency here so we can really see the part of her cheek that we need to bring back. And here again, this is a great place to use the polygonal lasso tool. We're adding to our selection. This does not at all have to be a perfect selection. Just gently click a bunch of times. You don't need a tablet. You can just use your mouse. Follow that contour of her face, just like that. Yes, it's going to look super jagged when we crank the transparency back up, right? Really jagged. But you know how you fix that? Just a couple ticks of smoothness down here. Look at that. Couple ticks of smoothness until it blends in. I'm particularly focusing on down here where her chin and neck run into each other and where next to the eye socket here where it runs into her hair. Once that looks about right, you've got the smoothness nailed. All right, great. We're outputting this to the layer mask. Again, let's hit OK. We've corrected that far side of her face. Great. How do we fix the hair? Well, the hair is actually pretty simple compared to the last hair, but it's an opportunity for me to show you that refine edge brush. So I really want to show you that real quick. Select the layer mask, go select and mask again. And we're going to use that refine edge brush. I'm going to leave it set to plus. We're going to make it just a little bit bigger than the hair. And I'm just going to begin painting over the edge of the hair and just say, hey, Photoshop, do your thing. This hair is over a really contrasting background up here where the background is that bright yellowy white color. Do your thing. Extract the hair from that background and look at what Photoshop is able to do. It's quite remarkable. Now out here, this part of the hair, I'm not even going to try to do that. It's just going to confuse everything and it's going to be a mess. That we'll just have to do manually. We already kind of did manually with the lasso tool and then we smoothed it and applied that little bit of feathering. But we have a little bit of a glow. There's a couple things that I like to do with hair and it all depends on the hairstyle. If it's like a crazy frizzy afro, that's one thing. If it's a woman who's got really windswept hair, that's another thing. If it's like a dude with like thick, dense dreadlocks that are shooting out every which direction, that's something else. She's got her hair pulled back pretty tightly, this bun. So that's a relatively simple hairstyle to cut out, when you compare it with everything else, relatively. So this one won't be too difficult. I generally don't like to apply smoothing after I've used the Refine Edge brush, but we can bump up the contrast a little bit, sharpen up that edge if it gets a little, kind of to the point where it's uncomfortably sharp, and then just probably a little bit less than a pixel of feathering. But again, it all depends on how big the hair is. She's a big part of this image, but her hair is not a big part of the image. So the hair is small when compared to the rest of the image. So something like maybe 0.8 pixels of feathering is good. And then just shift the edge inward a little bit until you start to see these kind of dark edges. Just kind of like a visual indicator that it's probably going to be a decent selection, and then hit OK. And you can see we've extracted the hair pretty well. You can go back now and do one final pass with your brush tool, set to soft to light, opacity, maybe 60%. Make sure our foreground color is set to black, and let's just dab away a couple times. Just clean up some of this stuff where it is particularly bright. And this would be a case where you could do a layer underneath and set it to multiply, and then darken these edges and blend her in like that. I'm not going to do it for the sake of saving time in this tutorial, but you can see if I zoom out, we've made a pretty nice selection of her. And by the way, the selection will work if we have a dark background, or if we go to a very light background, maybe a totally black background, or something in between. The selection and these edges are going to work with any of these backgrounds, and that is how you know you've probably gotten a pretty darn good selection of whatever it is that you're trying to select. So there you have it. We've created a selection, removed the background on a full-length portrait, and our closer individual street portrait as well. And that is it for this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. We learned how to extract two different kinds of images. Somewhere we've got the more complex hair and then the full body. So we could extract first those long straight runs of around her dress and then go back in for the second pass on that layer mask and clean up the hair and make that work. Using these techniques, you should be able to extract tons of objects and remove the background from a lot of different types of photos. If you're interested in seeing any of those other images that I had way back in the intro, you can leave a comment down below and let me know, hey, I want to know how to extract the dog or whatever. We can maybe make a video on that at some point in the future. If you made it this far, thank you so very much. I appreciate you. Hit that thumbs up button if you enjoyed the video, and leave a comment down below if you really enjoyed the video, even if it's just like a thumbs up emoji, something to let me know you made it this far and you liked it. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. You know the whole routine, the YouTube thing. I would super duper appreciate that. And guess what? We learned how to remove backgrounds today in Photoshop. Get it? Got it? Good. Nathaniel Dodson, tutvid.com. I'll catch you in the next one.